Welcome to the Iranian Republic. Today we're talking with Patrick Clawson, Senior Fellow at Washington Institute and Director of Viterbi Program on Iran and U.S. policy. As our viewers know, these days are the days of negotiation between the United States and the Islamic Republic. Sometimes we hear news of agreement being closed. Sometimes we hear that there's fundamental differences and the agreement might not be within reach. That's why we asked Patrick to come here and tell us about his thoughts and what can happen after these negotiations and what is the outlook. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you.
Uh, First of all, I would like to know your thoughts about the recent developments in negotiations. We had some delays in these weeks for seem to be for logistic reasons, but we also had some interviews by President Trump and also Marco Rubio saying that Iran cannot have any sort of enrichment program. And Iran also said we will never kind of forfeit our ability to enrich uranium and have a nuclear program that includes enriched uranium. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think this is going to be a big, major issue for the negotiations?
Well, both sides, that is to say, the Trump administration and also the Islamic Republic, have a long history of making extreme demands about what they want to accomplish in negotiations. And then sometimes the negotiations break down, and sometimes the negotiations reach an accord, which is very different from how each of the sides had described it. And I don't think we can necessarily tell what's going to happen here. But think there are a lot of signs that both the Trump administration and the Islamic Republic are very eager for a deal. And so, to my mind, it wouldn't be surprising if we got a deal which is a lot less far reaching than what either side has been describing.
And what that deal would look like based on what you have learned so far?
Well, it would certainly seem that the negotiations have been about the nuclear issue and not about the whole range of issues that separate the Islamic Republic and the United States. And so a nuclear only deal would have certain elements that, frankly, look kind of similar to what was in the JCPOA, namely restrictions on enrichment, inspections, and then there are a lot of questions. How long would the deal last? Would it be have sunset provisions or be a permanent deal? What are you going to do about the past questions about possible military activities and about the period of the last few years when Iran has not allowed International Atomic Energy Agency or IAEA in to gather information about some of Iran's activities. And so the IAEA warns that it has lost continuity of knowledge. What are you going to do about that? It's not clear.
Okay, that's interesting. And what do you think the United States would do if? I'm interested to know what do you think the United States would do if Islamic Republic says, okay, let's only talk about the nuclear issue, and we want to keep our negotiation, our ability to enrich uranium at 3 and something% at the civilian levels, and we're gonna keep that. And then, what do you think the Trump administration would be okay with that? And they agree and say, okay, let them have that and let them have the ability to enrich uranium at a certain level, and that would be it. And we can go and claim we had a better deal than JCPOA, maybe because it's a longer deal. Maybe it's 25 years of until you have the sunset.
So on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Trump implies that he would accept a deal like that. On Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, he implies that he wouldn't accept a deal like that. So I don't think we necessarily know what he would accept and what he would not accept. Uh, my personal guess would be that Trump's not particularly well informed about all kinds of the technical details about a deal. And so he might accept a deal which I would regard as being uh,
Mhm.
quite problematic, just because a deal like this has got a lot of technical elements that are really important for knowing how well it works. And Iran, after all, has a long history of not living up to its obligations. The discovery of the Natanz enrichment plant, for instance, was a great surprise back in 2003. And it had been built by Iran completely without informing the International Atomic Energy Agency, as it was required to do. And similarly with the Fordo plant, again, a complete surprise where Iran had not informed the IAEA. So I would think that any agreement about Iran enriching to 3.67 would need to have a whole lot of provisions about how to monitor and enforce a deal. Um, I'm not sure that the Trump team is necessarily that focused on all those kind of technical issues.
Okay, so there might be a possibility for the Islamic Republic to have a deal and then kind of go and start enriching uranium or do something that's kind of neglected in the deal when they signed it, and then they keep the program alive.
Indeed, the IAEA has warned that because it is lost continuity of knowledge, that it can't be sure whether or not Iran has a clandestine facility that it hasn't declared, with a whole set of enrichment machines going on outside of what we know about.
Then I would like us to kind of consider multiple scenarios. First, let's say Iran and the United States reach a deal on the nuclear issues only, not on the missiles and not on the proxies and the terrorists that the Islamic Republic supports. What would be Israel's reaction to this? What would be do they try to comply with that deal? And if yes, then what happens next?
Well, the Israeli government, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, while there was talk about the JCPOA, was deeply divided between some politicians like current Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, who wanted to attack Iran's facilities, and many in the Israeli security establishment, or the Israeli Defense Forces, who thought that was a really bad idea. Today, there's a much more consensus in Israel because of what the Israeli Defense Forces has been able to do over the last year to seriously degrade a number of Iran's proxies and Iran itself. So, after many years in which the IDF was terrified, terrified at what Hezbollah could do with its hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles, a war started, and Israel was able to destroy, by its account, 80% of those rockets and missiles, and frankly, nothing much happened. So while had been 80,000 Israelis who had fled from the Lebanese border because they were worried that Hezbollah might come across and attack, nobody fled out of fear of Hezbollah's missiles. And then, of course, Israel struck, killing not only Nasrallah, a man who thought that he was good at hiding and that he had well prepared bunkers, also his successor. And then there was the pager operation, the walkie talkie operation. And so then Israel was able to defend itself by itself against the Iranian missile attacks in early October. And the Israeli response was really quite devastating. I mean, they knocked out a lot of Iran's air defense system and Iran's ability to produce missiles. So the feeling in the Israeli establishment across the board is that Iran is vulnerable and that this is a good time to decisively eliminate the Iranian nuclear program, either through diplomacy or, if necessary, through military action. If a diplomatic deal doesn't eliminate the Iranian nuclear program to the degree to which Israel would like to see, Israel will be very unhappy. They don't want to cross Mr. Trump. Crossing Mr. Trump can be quite dangerous, as Mr. Zelensky discovered. But the Israeli establishment as a whole will be very unhappy if, in this moment of Iranian great vulnerability, the Iranian nuclear program isn't largely eliminated.
I see. And then let's consider this other scenario where there's no deal and uh, Islamic Republic and Trump administration they cannot reach a deal, and there's a plan to attack nuclear facilities of the Islamic Republic. Tell us a little bit more about what do you think is going to happen. We have a joint operation of Israel and the United States on nuclear facilities of Iran, and then next, then what happens next? Is it Iran retaliating for that, and then tell us a little bit about that scenario. That's possible.
Sure. If I were the leaders of the Islamic Republic, I would be reflecting very carefully on what's been going on in Yemen in the last few months. In that Trump, after insisting that he wasn't going to get sucked into another forever war and that he wanted to reduce U.S. military presence in the Middle East, he's in fact then involved in a sustained campaign against the Houthis with no obvious end to it. And it's a pretty substantial campaign. The Pentagon is being quite tight-lipped what it's saying about the campaign, but if we listen to the Houthis, there are a lot of people or a lot of places that are getting hit. And then look at what's happened the last couple of days, where after a successful Houthi missile strike on the Israeli airport at international airport at Lod, the Israelis struck hard against the Houthis with clear collaboration and cooperation with the United States. Now, it doesn't appear that it was a joint operation, but boy, it came close to being a joint operation in that the United States was clearly backstopping the Israelis, not only with intelligence, but um, in other ways as well. And so, if I were in the Islamic Republic, I'd be contemplating, I don't know about this, because after all, Yemen is further from Israel than the nuclear sites in Iran are from Israel. And so I would be kind of concerned that there might be an Israeli only strike against Iran, but with a lot of help from the United States. Uh, and it might even be more of a joint strike. After all, to do a strike like that requires not only the planes that are making the attack, but it requires intelligence. It requires somebody being there to uh, pick up the pilots if the plane gets shot down. And the United States might fulfill those kind of roles while leaving to the Israelis to do the attack on their own. And it's even conceivable that the United States may participate in an attack. Um, the New York Times account of what the Israelis were considering if they did an attack was very interesting in that it suggested that Israel would use a commando raid for deep underground facilities, similar to the commando raid that Israel used against suspected chemical weapons facilities in Syria while Assad was still in power. That would be a very difficult thing to carry out. It's a long ways to get um, to Iran. Um, but it's possible. I mean, there's some of the Israeli operations inside Iran have been quite impressive. I mean, you think Fakhruddin and how he was killed. I mean, the idea of, or for that matter, the way in which the Hamas leader Husseini was killed. So it doesn't have to necessarily be flying in a helicopter. You could imagine ways in which the Israelis could get commandos there and other means.
And then what would be the response of the Islamic Republic? Another argument can be made that Houthis they don't have as many missiles as Islamic Republic. They have been able to successfully hit Ben Gurion Airport. Iran is gonna do like 50 times more than that, and they're gonna rip through the missile defense systems, and they're gonna be able to hit Israel. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think Iran is capable of performing that? And then also, there are these ideas of, okay, if you want to go in and have a bombing campaign of Iran, we have to take out their air defenses, and then that's going to take a while, and that involves a lot of bombing, and also, and a third factor is like facilities like Fordo that are deep under mountains. Uh, can Israel cannot destroy them by itself, but then it needs a lot of help from the United States. What are your thoughts on that? Responses from Iran, and also the complications of attacking these nuclear facilities. Do you think these are something that Israel can manage, or what do you? Yeah, what a scenario
For
do you
a,
play out?
for a long time, the Israelis were defense establishment was extremely worried about the issues that you're raising, and in particular that um, Hezbollah's missiles coming from Lebanon would have a real impact on major Israeli cities, and that okay, it's a long ways to get from Iran to Israel, and the air defenses could kick in, and maybe the Iranian missiles wouldn't have that much impact, but Hezbollah had, by some estimates, 200,000 missiles and rockets that he could aim at Israel, and that would be really devastating.
That is true.
Oops, oops, not true. And so, therefore, the self confidence among the Israeli Defense Forces about their ability to deal with an Iranian response is really dramatically different than where it was a year and a half ago. And furthermore, the confidence among the Israeli Defense Forces that they can insert people long distances to carry out commando raids, to get at deeply buried sites, and that they can take out deeply buried sites. I mean, Nasrallah's bunker was by some accounts as deeply buried as Fordo, and the Israelis took it out. And so there's a much more confidence on the part of the Israeli Defense Forces that they can deal with these situations, and not the kind of concern that we saw just for years had led the Israelis' defense forces to be strongly opposed to any kind of attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. There's also considerable confidence that what Israel was able to do to the air defenses in Israeli attack last October has left them in very poor shape, and that will last for at least until another few months, if not longer.
I see. And then I want to talk about the topic that's kind of our interest, that's in the Iranian Republic, is enabling Iranian people to rise up and be able to basically get rid of the Islamic Republic, have a real democracy, and have a government where it represents people, and we don't have a dictatorship in Iran. Do you think the military action or reaching a deal, which one would kind of benefit the civil rights movements and not the civil rights, excuse me, the civil society in Iran, and helping them kind of move forward? Because we know some sanctions are hurting people in general, also weakening the government, of course, but hurting people in general. And what happens there if there's a deal and if there's a conflict or there's bombing of the nuclear facilities? What are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like that would be a more permanent solution for the Islamic Republic as a rogue state if people get their own rights and we have a democracy in Iran.
Well, I am concerned by the extent to which significant figures in Israel have talked themselves into the view that if there are successful Israeli military strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, and Iran seems to have lost most of its nuclear program, that this would be so humiliating to the Islamic Republic that it would be hard for the Islamic Republic to stay in power. And I think that that's a extraordinarily gamble, and I wouldn't want to base policies of any government on that kind of a gamble. Uh, Hopefully, the day will come soon when the Islamic Republic doesn't is no longer in power, but I wouldn't want to place my bets on that happening. Uh, on the other hand, it's also possible that if there's a deal, that could be quite destabilizing. We've seen a lot of Khomeini's language being very tough, and a lot of his followers who act as if, oh, that could never possibly happen. And we're about to publish a piece at the Washington Institute about reminding people, okay, you talk about Imam Ali a lot. What happened to Imam Ali? How did he die? He died when he agreed to a deal with the other side, and his own followers got so upset that they assassinated him. So, is that in Khamenei's future? That if he agrees to a deal, that some of his own followers would be so upset that they might assassinate him? I think that's very unlikely. But my point is just simply that a deal could be quite destabilizing for the Islamic Republic.
So either way, it's not a great situation for Islamic Republic from your perspective.
The alternatives are terrible. The alternatives are terrible. So we are sometimes told that the alternatives to the United States are terrible, that either you have to agree to a deal with Iran, which leaves them with disturbing capabilities, or you have to contemplate an attack on Iran, and those are really bad choices. True, but the choices facing Iran are even worse. So while I don't like the U.S. choices, they're better than the choices facing the Islamic Republic.
And what do you think about the argument that says, if even if you go in and you bomb all the nuclear facilities of the Islamic Republic, the knowledge is still there, and the Islamic Republic is gonna develop a more sophisticated program somewhere else that you may not know about, and then they're gonna be able to build a bomb. Maybe not now, maybe 5, 10 years from now. Do you think Israel, United States might they'll find those facilities, they bomb them again, or there's another argument that says, if you want to be sure that's not going to happen, you have to go into Iran and then you have to topple the Islamic Republic. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, having lost $30 billion supporting um, Hafiz Assad and got nothing for it, I suspect that if Iran's nuclear program is set back a very great deal, there will be a vigorous debate about whether or not Iran should spend the many, many billions of dollars that would be needed to rebuild the program, knowing the possibility that it'll get a bomb again. And so it's not clear to me that this would happen, or at least not happen quickly. And at the very least, we would have bought a window of time. And after all, at some point, Khamenei is going to die. And when Khamenei dies, there's going to be a moment of flux. We don't know what's going to happen. And so if we can postpone Iran's nuclear progress until after Khamenei's demise, that may solve the problem. I would think it'd be wonderful. I think most Americans would think it'd be wonderful if the Islamic Republic ceased to exist. But I don't think we should base U.S. government policy on that hope.
Gotcha. And then speaking of the time and the timeline, what do you think is going to be the timeline for these negotiations? I know President Trump said 60 days, uh, and Europeans have summer for the snapback, and then after in October we have all the restrictions kind of lifted, and then Islamic Republic have the freedom to do a lot of things. And what are your thoughts on that? And what would be the timeline of these negotiations? When should we expect an outcome?
Well, Iran wants to play for time. It wants to run out the clock, in part because the snapback provisions of UN sanctions ends in October, and in part because Iran wants to rebuild its capabilities. And in fact, there are rumors that Iran has proposed that, okay, we'll agree to allow the snapback provisions to last even longer. They want to run out the clock. They want to keep things going for a while. The Europeans have been even tougher than the Trump administration about saying, no, we need to get to an agreement soon. It'll be interesting to see what happens if the negotiations with the United States have stalled, aren't moving forward. Will the Europeans say, all right, the time has come to snap back or not? And the Iranians have said very clearly and repeatedly that if there's a snapback, that they plan to withdraw from the NPT. Well, that'll be a worries about Iran's nuclear program will accelerate if that happens.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then my question is, so why Iran hasn't? So we know Iran has enough fissile material. They They have the ability to. They have ballistic missiles that have a certain range. They're not ICBMs, but they have like they can hit Israel. Why Iran hasn't developed the nuclear weapons yet? What is stopping Iran from doing it?
Well, there are some real advantages to being considered as being on the edge of having nuclear weapons, and maybe even having the weapons, without publicly acknowledging it. Look at what the Israeli approach for decades now, where at first people thought, well, Israel probably has nuclear weapons, and in recent decades, Israel definitely has nuclear weapons, but Israel doesn't confirm it. And there's some real advantages to that, in that you run less of a risk that someone's going to hit you. You run less of a risk of international isolation. Um, and so the Iranian approach has been to slowly move forward so the world gets used to each step. There was a time when consensus in Washington was that if Iran enriches to 20%, my God, that's going to be horrible. We're going to have to do something dramatic. And then if Iran enriches to 60%, the end is near. Well, Iran has done each of those things, and they've done it slowly, getting us used to their progress in such a way that they've been able to get away with these things. Well, I can well imagine Iran being satisfied with this approach of taking your time.
Gotcha. And so one last question: what do you think is going to happen based on what all of you've seen so far?
I think both sides, the United States and Iran, want a deal. And so yeah, I think it's more likely that we'll get a deal than not have a deal. And given the complexities of reaching a deal, I think it's more likely to be a kind of empty deal, not a whole lot there, than it is to be a full and complete deal. I'm not happy about that because I think Iran's at a moment of great vulnerability. It should be possible to achieve a really far reaching deal, but I don't think that's the most likely scenario.
Okay, so you think a deal is likely, but a deal that's going to be better than JCPOA for the Islamic Republic, not for the
I,
U.S.
I think back to what happened with Trump's criticisms of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. After bitterly denouncing the agreement, Trump negotiated a new free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, the MCA. Which the differences between NAFTA and the MCA is basically that all of the commas were changed to semicolons. And I get concerned that's what we may see.
I see. I see. Very interesting. So, and in the coming days, I'm sure everybody will be following what's happening in the negotiations, and hopefully, I, we're all hoping for peace, but let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. It may be a surprise.